Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world of drafty castles, dim candlelight, and very questionable hygiene. You shuffle down a cold stone hallway wrapped in a scratchy wool cloak. There's no mirror in sight, just a rippling basin of water reflecting your weary face. You're not quite sure what you look like, but you hope it's pleasing by the standards of the time, whatever those might be. Welcome to Medieval Beauty, where the lighting is always a little too moody. The ideals are oddly specific, and the risks? Well, let's just say you probably won't survive this with your health intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, what's your location and what time are you listening to this? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a noblewoman's chamber, lit by flickering tallow candles and the faint glow of a hearth. Thick wooden shutters block the wind and the outside world. It's peaceful in here, almost too quiet. The first thing you notice is how little glass there is. No mirrors, no windows you can truly see through. If you want to gaze upon your reflection, you'll need a polished metal plate, or for the rich, a little piece of imported Venetian glass. Expensive, fragile, and just murky enough to distort everything anyway. So, beauty in the Middle Ages? It's largely based on what others tell you. Word of mouth, hush gossip, a neighbor's side eye at Sunday Mass. Imagine that, your whole identity, your level of attractiveness, your self-worth, all filtered through candlelight and the cruel honesty of others. If someone says you've got a lovely forehead, well, that's what you go with. You walk past a chambermaid holding a carved wooden comb and a bit of rosemary sprig. She's brushing her mistress's hair, murmuring something about flaxen locks and marriage prospects. Beauty here isn't about standing out. It's about fitting in with ideals that vary wildly depending on where and when you are. For women of noble birth, fair skin is everything. It means you're rich enough to stay indoors, safe from the sun and the drudgery of fieldwork. It's a silent sign of power and privilege. You'll see women using mixtures of vinegar, lead, and chalk to achieve that pale look. Yes, lead, that same metal we now avoid like the plague. Back then, it was slathered on with love and a touch of desperation. Historians still argue whether most people knew how dangerous these cosmetics were, or if they simply assumed the hair loss and peeling skin were just part of the process. Men, on the other hand, are held to different standards. Strength, posture, and visible health mattered most, although that didn't stop some from sneaking a little rose water on the cheeks for extra color. You pass a night rubbing oil into his hair while muttering a prayer for strong shoulders and thicker calves. There's beauty in function. A handsome man is one who can wield a sword and lift a barrel, and maybe write a poem if he's feeling very confident. But let's not forget the clergy's influence here. Religion seeps into everything, even ideas of attractiveness. Virtue is often considered the most beautiful quality, especially for women, which means being quiet, modest, pale, and painfully docile. If you speak too much, laugh too loudly, or wear color that's just a little too bold, someone might start whispering that you're inviting sin, maybe even demonic. Cheery, right? Now, beauty standards weren't just regional, they were ridiculously specific. In France, a small chin and rosy cheeks might win a man's heart. In England, you might want a long neck and clear, unmarked skin. In Italy, a smooth forehead and thick hair. And all of this without the benefit of proper grooming tools or any real way to verify you're pulling it off. No selfies, no ring lights, just hope, hearsay, and a prayer to Saint Agnes. You turn down a corridor and pass a kitchen girl rubbing crushed strawberries on her cheeks. Natural rouge. It smells sweet, but won't last long. Still, it's safer than the mercury-laced blush her mistress uses. Mercury? On the face? Again, survival rates in pursuit of beauty? Not great. But even with these dangers, the effort was constant because beauty wasn't vanity, It was currency. It could earn you a better marriage, more favor at court, or even a lighter sentence if you were ever on trial. There's a reason trial records occasionally note someone's gentle expression or fair visage. A nice face could mean the difference between freedom and the stocks. Interestingly, while modern beauty can often be performative, catwalks, cameras, curated feeds, medieval beauty was intensely personal. You didn't parade yourself in front of crowds. You walked quietly, you covered yourself in layers of symbolism, and you prayed that others noticed without you seeming like you wanted them to. It's a delicate dance of being seen without seeking. Still, even then, beauty could be subversive. Some women use their appearance to manipulate politics or court intrigue. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who defied half a dozen norms and used her wit and charm to sway kings and crusades. Or lesser-known women who ran estates, wrote poetry, and shaped regional politics, all while navigating a maze of rules about how much skin was too much, how much eyeliner meant sin. And then there's you, moving quietly through this ancient world, observing its strange rituals, its smoky perfumes, and its reverence for pale skin and plucked hairlines. You're not judging, just watching. And slowly, you begin to understand that medieval beauty isn't one thing. It's not even a consistent idea. It's 1,000 quiet rituals, half-remembered stories, dangerous powders, and whispered rules. And like everything else in this era, it's all about survival.
You wake to the sound of soft rustling, linen skirts, maybe, or a mortar grinding gently in the next room. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you notice a young noblewoman at her dressing table. She leans forward toward a polished silver plate, trying to inspect her skin. It's hard to see much, even with the candles, but she dabs at her face with something pale and powdery. You edge closer. It's lead white. Again. Yes, we're really doing this. Let's talk about skin. The medieval ideal for women was skin like milk, not healthy glow or sun-kissed radiance. Nope. The goal was to look like you'd never seen the sun, never worked a day, never sweated in your life. The more colorless, the better. If someone compares your skin to linen or fresh cheese, it's a compliment, not a cry for help. But nature doesn't always cooperate, does it? So they got creative. Women used ground-up pearls, crushed eggshells, vinegar-soaked chalk, and, yes, white lead paste to fake the perfect complexion. Some mixed it with animal fat to help it stick. The result? Porcelain skin with a light shimmer and slowly deteriorating health. Lead poisoning wasn't a concern back then, or at least not one anyone wanted to admit. Historians still argue whether people noticed that these beauty treatments were making them sick, or if it was simply written off as a mysterious wasting illness. As you continue through the room, you spot another woman lying on a wooden bench with slices of raw meat pressed to her cheeks. Supposedly, it helped with rosiness. It also helped with attracting flies. But hey, beauty has its price. Even stranger, pale blue veins were considered attractive. Visible veins meant your skin was thin and pure, almost ethereal. Some women even used blue paint or tiny brushes dipped in plant dyes to fake their veins. Imagine spending your morning sketching fake blood vessels onto your temple because Jeffrey at the market said he liked dainty girls. That's dedication. Of course, this ideal was tied to class. The peasants working in the fields didn't have time to chase paleness. Their faces were tanned, sun-wrinkled, and wind-burnt. But even among the lower classes, lighter skin was prized. A girl might cover herself with a hood or veil just to keep the sun off her face. Sometimes they'd rub clay or chalk on their skin for Sunday Mass, just enough to fake refinement before heading back to work on Monday. For men, fair skin was also associated with nobility, but with a twist. A knight might be fair, but he should also look robust. Too pale, and people would assume you were ill or bookish, maybe one of those scribes who coughed a lot and wrote about moral decay. Not hot. The perfect man was sun-kissed just enough to imply outdoor activity without tipping into plowboy. You pass a monk in the hallway, muttering a prayer as he arranges herbs, calendula for soothing skin, rosemary to ward off evil, and lavender to cleanse the spirit. Monastic monasteries were unexpected hotbeds of skincare. Monks and nuns wrote manuals on beauty, mostly framed as health advice. After all, cleanliness is next to godliness, and if looking a little dewy helped keep your soul pure, who's complaining? Still, the church had its opinions. Too much time spent preening was frowned upon. You might be accused of vanity, a sin closely associated with women and mirrors. There are texts that warn against excessive paleness achieved through deception, implying it tricks men into lust and leads them straight to eternal damnation. Fun times. Now, let's get really weird. One fringe beauty treatment involved bathing in donkey milk. Yes, donkey milk. The belief was that it softened skin and restored youth. Some women, wealthy ones of course, would import it, bathe in it, and claim they were reversing age itself. Whether it worked or just made them smell like a stable is, still up for debate. You pass a young apprentice, grinding something foul-smelling in a bowl. He says it's made of boiled onions, lard, and sheep dung, an ancient remedy for blemishes. Supposedly, if applied before bed, it helped with acne. More likely, it just cleared the room of anyone who might comment on your skin. And let's not forget freckles. In some places, they were considered charming, a sign of youth and vitality. In others, they were a curse. People used lemon juice or vinegar mixed with powdered alum to bleach them out. The sting meant it was working, right? Sure, and if your skin burned a little, even better. By the way, this obsession with pale skin wasn't limited to Europe. Across the medieval Islamic world, China, and even parts of Africa, light skin was associated with wealth and social standing. The methods varied: rice powder, sandalwood paste, or even crushed pearl. But the message was the same. If you're not out working under the sun, you must be important. Of course, nature doesn't follow rules. Aging, scars, rashes, and birthmarks happen to everyone, and medieval people didn't shy away from home remedies. Gonalic rubbed on boils, boiled lettuce water for smoother skin, a poultice made from mashed leeks and butter to soften your hands. Did any of it work? Maybe. Did it smell like a soup kitchen? Absolutely. And yet, through all this, beauty remained aspirational, delicate, fleeting, and just out of reach. You weren't just trying to look good, you were trying to look elevated, closer to the Virgin Mary or an angel in a fresco. Not human, exactly. Something a little better, a little more divine. You sit near a hearth now, listening to the quiet crackle of flames. A maid gently blows on a coal to warm a tiny dish of beeswax and herbs. She'll use it to smooth her mistress's lips, cracked from winter winds and fasting. She hums softly. The same song her mother used, the same ritual passed down. And you realize something else. This pursuit of beauty, this quiet war against sun and age and blemish, it isn't just about looks. It's about control, about saying, I may not have power over my fate, but I can choose how I present myself to the world, even in the Middle Ages, especially in the Middle Ages.
You're led by the hand down another dim corridor, deeper into the heart of the manor. A lady-in-waiting opens a carved wooden door with a creak, revealing a quiet chamber with soft rugs and a polished bench. She gestures for you to sit, then lifts her candle and studies your face. Not your eyes, not your nose, your forehead. Yes, that's what we're talking about tonight. Welcome to the curious world of plucked hairlines and sculpted brows, where the height of your forehead somehow reveals the height of your social grace. In this world, a high, broad forehead is the ultimate fashion statement. It's not just a feature, it's a billboard for refinement. Forget cheekbones or lashes. In the medieval mind, a long, smooth forehead shows intelligence, nobility, and restraint. You don't just happen to have a large forehead, you earn it.
Which means, of course, you pluck for it. The lady dips 2 fingers into a tiny jar of resin and rubs it along her brow line. Then she starts plucking, each hair yanked out with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who's done this before. You wince on her behalf. She doesn't blink. She's after that smooth, arched look, clean brows, a vacant hairline, and nothing to distract from her forehead's majestic sweep. Eyebrows? Absolutely optional. In fact, many women remove them entirely. Sometimes even the eyelashes go too, especially if they're too thick or dark. Sparse is elegant. Sparse is sophisticated. You look surprised. She notices and smiles faintly. Too much brow, she whispers, is like too much wine. It dulls the soul. Historians still argue whether this trend started with religious ideals and influence from Byzantine icons or simply fashion-forward royalty flexing their foreheads at court. But what we do know is that these grooming rituals were taken very seriously. And the tools? Primitive but effective. Tweezers made of bronze or bone, resin pastes that hardened into sticky globs to rip off stray hairs. And if you didn't have access to those, you could always singe them off with a candle. Yes, candle. Near your eyes. One wrong move, and you weren't just fashionable, you were a cautionary tale. You move to a wooden vanity, where another woman is sketching over her now bare brows with a tiny stick dipped in soot and goosh fat. She's redrawing her expression, one deliberate stroke at a time. Not unlike your modern brow pencil, except this one smells faintly of roasted bird and fireplace ash. This level of detail isn't just about looking good, it's about sending the right message. In portraits of noblewomen, the forehead is often the blank canvas of status. A high hairline meant you were above base desires, above the mud of earthly concerns. Some even believed it echoed the shape of the moon, serene, luminous, and impossibly distant. It wasn't just women either. Some fashion-conscious men followed suit, trimming and shaping brows to appear more thoughtful or saintly, though they had to walk a finer line. Too much plucking and you risked seeming vain, or worse, effeminate. And in medieval society, that could get you laughed out of court or exiled from your guild faster than you could say brow gel. One knight you pass has shaved the front of his hair back a full 2 inches. His armor gleams, his posture is noble, and his forehead is basically a runway. He bows slightly as if daring you to comment. You don't, because clearly this is serious business. And it wasn't just hair that got the treatment. Women often used vinegar or walnut oil to bleach their foreheads and keep the skin smooth. Some rubbed rose water or mashed white beans into their hairline in hopes of softening the skin. The phrase "beauty is pain" wasn't coined yet, but it definitely applied. You peek out a stained glass window, where 2 peasants are laughing in the field, both sporting unbothered full brows. No plucking, no oil, no ash, just nature doing its thing. For them, beauty is tied more to function. Who has the strongest arms, the cleanest teeth, the fewest fleas? They have no idea that somewhere behind castle walls, a noblewoman is risking her vision to burn off 3 eyebrow hairs with a candle. The contrast is striking. Still, even peasants feel the pressure at times. A young servant girl tucks her hair behind her ears and tries to smooth her brow with spit and a cloth. She's heard the rumors that if she makes herself look just right, the steward might notice. And if the steward notices, maybe she'll end up in a slightly warmer room next winter. Beauty isn't just decoration, it's negotiation. Now imagine being born with a naturally high forehead. Jackpot, right? Not quite, because fashions change. What was desirable in France might be mocked in Spain, and what earned you compliments in one court could get you teased in another. There's always that one duchess who's just too plucked, her expression forever stuck between mild surprise and unspoken judgment. You linger near a tapestry showing the Virgin Mary, her features delicate, her hairline impossibly high. Artists exaggerated this look in religious imagery, reinforcing it as the gold standard. It wasn't just divine, it was instructional. Want to be holy? Start by removing 30% of your face. The candlelight begins to fade, flickering shadows across the walls. The women finish their grooming rituals, tuck away their tools, and retreat to their beds. Their brows are thinned, their foreheads gleaming, and their expressions oddly serene. They've done what was expected. They've upheld the invisible rules. They've turned their faces into symbols. And so have you, watching from the corner, noting every pluck, every smudge of soot, every drawn line. You begin to understand, in this world, beauty isn't accidental. It's curated, crafted, and quietly enforced. You step back into the corridor, feeling the cool air against your own forehead. It's unplucked, imperfect, maybe even low by medieval standards, but in this moment, it feels like a crown, one they can't take.
Your footsteps echo as you make your way down a winding staircase, the chill of the stone pressing through your shoes. You reach the lower levels of the manor where warmth is a rumor and sunlight has long since faded. A door creaks open into a room that smells faintly of herbs and ash and something sharper, more organic. A woman sits at a rough wooden table, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. She looks up and smiles, revealing a row of crooked, yellowed teeth. You smile, back, or you try to. But then you remember, smiling too widely in the Middle Ages? Not always a great idea. Let's talk about teeth. In a time without toothbrushes, floss, or that one minty mouthwash that burns your soul, dental health was mostly a matter of luck, or genetics, or access to honey and wine instead of acidic rye gruel. You pass a cracked mirror and catch a glimpse of your own teeth. They're fine, which in this era basically makes you royalty. Medieval people did care about their teeth, but in a more practical way than you might expect. Clean teeth were associated with health, not beauty. White teeth didn't carry the social cachet they do today. In fact, some sources suggest that showing too many teeth when smiling, especially for women, was considered crass or even animalistic. It wasn't ladylike to beam like a jester. A quiet, closed-mouthed smile, elegant, subtle, safe. You step into a corner where a young monk is stirring a pot of sage and salt water. He offers a shy explanation, a rinse for the mouth. Sage, mint, and even vinegar were common ingredients in oral rinses. They weren't brushing like we do today, but they were swishing, chewing sticks, and scraping with rough cloths. If you were wealthy, you might have a silver toothpick or a custom-made scraper. If you were poor, well, you picked your teeth with twigs, or, if you were truly unlucky, not at all. Historians still debate just how common tooth decay really was in this period. Some excavations show remarkably intact sets of teeth, especially among the rural poor who ate less sugar. Others reveal grim scenes, abscesses, worn enamel, and rotted molars. One theory suggests the wealthy actually had worse teeth, thanks to their diet of sweet wines, preserved fruits, and refined flours. Peasants may have eaten gruel, but at least it didn't stick to their molars. Of course, there were remedies. You pass a midwife boiling parsley and pepper, explaining that the paste is for tooth worms. Yes, worms. Many believe that cavities were caused by tiny creatures boring into the tooth. The solution? Smoke them out. Some treatments involved puffing hot herbs into the mouth and praying for the worms to flee. Did it work? Not even a little, but it was dramatic, and that counts for something. You crouch beside an elderly woman as she prepares her teeth for church. She rubs charcoal on a cloth and gently polishes the fronts. Charcoal was used as a kind of abrasive toothpaste, better than nothing, though it probably didn't help with staining. Afterward, she chews on cloves to freshen her breath. Cloves, by the way, were like medieval Tic Tacs, if you could afford them. They masked bad breath, soothed aching gums, and gave the illusion of being clean, even when your molars were plotting mutiny. Then there's the issue of dental repair, or the lack of it.
There are a few scattered cases of tooth extractions in medieval texts, but most people lived with the pain until the tooth fell out, or until someone forcibly removed it with a hot iron and a prayer. An abscessed tooth could kill you if the infection spread. Some people wore amulets or prayed to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of dental pain, for relief. One record even describes a woman biting down on a silver coin during an extraction. It's unclear if the coin was for the pain or the dentist's fee. Meanwhile, beauty standards quietly tiptoe around all this. Teeth weren't the centerpiece of medieval attraction. You didn't need to be dazzling, you just needed to not be offensive. Women painted their lips occasionally, but rarely showed their teeth. Artists often depicted faces with closed mouths, serene expressions, and very little emotion. It was less about charm and more about containment. Still, in certain circles, tooth appearance did matter. The court of Burgundy, for example, became known for placing emphasis on cleanliness and physical grooming, which included the condition of one's teeth. Courtiers were expected to maintain a clean, neat appearance, which meant not having spinach between your molars during diplomacy. You hear hushed laughter behind a curtain. Two young girls are trying a beauty trick, rubbing sage ash mixed with honey across their teeth. Supposedly, it whitens them. In reality, it just sticks to everything. But they giggle anyway, swearing it's working. One says she saw a merchant's wife do it before a feast. She looked like a saint who drank wine, she whispers. There's a softer side to all this too. You watch as a mother gently cleans her son's teeth with a willow stick, wrapping the end in linen and dipping it in salt. It's tender, even intimate. She hums a lullaby while she works, as if caring for his teeth will protect more than just his smile. You leave them and wander into a quiet chapel, where a nun lights a candle for someone long gone. Her own teeth are missing in places, but her voice is steady when she prays. She doesn't care about beauty, not the worldly kind. But even she, once, might have swished rosemary water and hoped for a smoother smile. As you leave the chapel, you press your lips together. You're suddenly aware of your own teeth, how they sit, how they feel. In this medieval world, beauty isn't always what you show. It's what you hide, what you soften, what you hint at. A restrained smile, a lowered gaze, the whisper of teeth behind still lips. Because, in the end, showing your full grin might say more than you want it to.
You step outside for a moment, into the faint gray of early morning. The air is crisp, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel alive. Across the courtyard, a few noble women are gathered near the well. They're laughing softly, their heads bowed, their hair hidden beneath layers of linen and silk. You squint. Hair. Now there's a topic that practically ran its own social class in the medieval world. Let's be honest. Hair was everything. The color, the length, how much you showed and when you showed it. Each choice whispered volumes about your status, your morality, and even your marriageability. Today, you might change your hair for fashion. Back then, you changed it to survive. Blonde hair? The gold standard. Literally. It was linked with youth, purity, and angelic virtue. You see it in frescoes, tapestries, poems. Even the Virgin Mary is often painted with fair hair, regardless of her Middle Eastern origins. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just another case of fashion overriding historical fact, but either way, it stuck. Women with blonde hair were idolized, romanticized, and occasionally accused of witchcraft, because balance is important. But most women weren't naturally blonde, so of course, they faked it. You duck into a side room and watch a noblewoman's maid mixing ingredients in a bowl. Crushed saffron, alum, and lye. The concoction smells like regret, but when applied and left under the sun, it lightens the hair. Sometimes lemon juice was used, sometimes ash. One popular method involved sitting near an open flame to bake the color in. Just imagine that,
sizzling your scalp for fashion while your eyebrows are already plucked halfway to the back of your head. And if you couldn't go blonde, you aimed for shine. Smooth, lustrous hair was admired, especially if it could be braided or coiled into elegant shapes. Peasants might coat their hair in egg whites or goose fat to tame the frizz. Nobles had the luxury of oils, rosemary, lavender, and even imported myrrh for those who could afford it. Hair wasn't just grown, it was maintained. But here's the twist. Once married, most women covered it up. Married women were expected to keep their hair veiled, to wear it in braids, buns, or wrapped tightly under wimples, head rails, and other delightful bits of linen origami. Exposed hair, especially flowing, unbound hair, was seen as either childish or scandalous. It was associated with brides, virgins, or women of questionable virtue. So if your hair was visible, people were either thinking you were too young to know better or too bold to care. And trust me, that second one got people talking. You enter a chapel and notice a statue of a saint with flowing locks. There's reverence in how the strands are carved, but also a message. She's pure or repentant, or both. Medieval stories often describe women letting their hair down as a sign of penance or deep mourning. Even prostitutes, interestingly, were sometimes identified by their exposed hair, though in certain cities they were required by law to wear ribbons or specific hairstyles to distinguish them from respectable women. It's confusing. That's the point. You glance into a courtyard where girls are learning to braid each other's hair. They hum nursery songs and swap gossip. Each braid, each twist, each pin is a coded message. Some regions used hair to show mourning, others to announce engagement. Even nuns, who cut their hair short when taking their vows, saw it as a symbolic severing from vanity and worldly desire. Hair could also be political. Queens often set the tone for court fashion. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, made long, loose hair temporarily acceptable, at least in the safety of royal circles. And the famous Isabeau of Bavaria was said to have worn elaborate coifs and towering headpieces that extended the line of her skull like a modern-day sci-fi helmet. Not practical, not subtle, but unforgettable. Men, meanwhile, had their own standards. Shoulder-length hair was ideal for knights and nobles, long enough to be gallant, but not so long as to interfere with helmets or dignity. Beards came and went with fashion depending on the region. Clean-shaven faces could signal youth and piety, thick beards, power and virility. But unkempt, that meant you'd either given up or joined a monastery. You pass a squire brushing his lord's hair with what looks like a carved boar bristle brush. There's care in it, ritual. The knight says nothing, just stares into the fire, his face hard and unreadable. But this grooming isn't just vanity. It's part of preparing for court, for war, for being seen. Back in the women's quarters, someone's wrapping a crisp linen veil around her head. She tucks every last strand away. She doesn't look in a mirror, just presses her fingers along the folds until it feels right. The result is elegant, severe, and oddly powerful. Hair hidden, identity sharpened. And yet, under all that covering, it was still there, growing, tangling, graying. Medieval people had remedies for that, too. Gray hair could be darkened with oak gall ink or soot. Some tried to prevent balding with rosemary oil or onion paste. One popular remedy for hair growth involved mixing nettle, vinegar, and pigeon droppings. And no, we don't recommend trying that. Historians still argue whether these treatments were actually used often or just recorded in texts for the amusement of later readers. Either way, the commitment is admirable. You finally settle near a wash basin where a girl is combing her hair before bed. It's unbound, thick and tangled from the day's work. She winces but keeps brushing. Her mother told her to comb every night keeps bad dreams away. You're not sure if that's superstition or
just a good way to relax, but either way, it works. Because in the quiet of that dim room, with hair falling softly over her shoulders and the comb whispering through each strand, you see it clearly. Hair isn't just a symbol. It's a memory, a legacy, a language. And in this strange, cold, beautiful world, it speaks louder than words.
You slip back inside just as the morning sun begins to filter through a stained glass window, casting pools of red and gold on the stone floor. The manor is beginning to stir, but it's still early enough for quiet. You follow the faint scent of rosemary and lavender down a narrow hallway and into what must be a kind of storage room, but not for grain or tools. This room stores scents, bottles, bowls, sachets of herbs, and something else too, an unspoken war against medieval reality. Let's talk about smell. In the medieval world, beauty wasn't just what people saw, it was what they smelled. You walk past a linen cloth laced with dried rose petals. Someone's hung it near the window, so the scent will waft through the room as the breeze shifts. Nearby, a glove, just one, sits on a carved table. It smells faintly of violet and orange peel. Perfumed gloves were a fashion statement and a survival tactic. If someone approached you, they smelled your glove before they got to you. Because here's the honest truth. Most people didn't bathe very often. Not because they hated water, well, okay, some did, but because bathing came with risks. Warm water opened the pores, and open pores were thought to invite disease. That, combined with freezing winters, limited plumbing, and the logistics of hauling gallons of water into a wooden tub, meant full-body bathing was usually reserved for the wealthy. And even then, not all that frequent. So how did people stay fresh? They didn't, really. They masked it. You kneel near a box of dried herbs, lavender, sage, bay leaves, and something more pungent, like myrrh. These were sewn into little pouches and tucked into sleeves, hoods, and bodices. Perfumed sachets helped absorb sweat and ward off odor. Some women even stuffed them inside their undergarments. Strategic placement was an art form. Rosewater was a favorite for the wealthy. It wasn't just for romance. It was for rinsing your face, dabbing on your wrists, and even spritzing onto linens and veils. You watch a young noblewoman pour a few drops into a copper bowl and inhale deeply before dressing. It doesn't erase the scent of the chamber pot or the smoky hearth, but it helps. Men had their own tricks. Scented beard oils were popular among the upper class, often infused with cedarwood or musk. A knight might dab a bit on before battle, not for intimidation, but because someone was probably going to write a ballad about him afterward, and nobody wants their hero to smell like wet dog. You pass a servant scrubbing a cloak with vinegar and thyme. It's not glamorous, but it helps strip the worst of the odors. In some towns, clothing was smoked with herbs over fire pits to kill lice and make them smell less like damp wool and regret. A bit of mint or dried lavender would be tossed into traveling trunks to keep the contents bearable. And if that wasn't enough, cover it up with incense. Lots of incense. Churches burned it constantly, not just for ceremony, but to cover the natural musk of large, tightly packed congregations. The holier the smell, the less attention paid to the rest. But smell wasn't just a matter of courtesy. It was tied to morality. A fragrant person was considered virtuous, refined, and spiritually clean. A foul smell, on the other hand, was often linked to sin, disease, or corruption of the soul. There's even a term for it, miasma, the belief that bad air carried illness and evil. Historians still argue whether this belief actually helped hygiene indirectly by encouraging scent management and basic cleanliness, or whether it just made people paranoid and really into dried citrus peels. Now picture this. It's summer. You're wearing 3 layers of linen and wool. Your chemise is sticking to your back. You've just spent the day attending a feast, walking through muddy streets, and maybe visiting the chapel. You're sweating, but you can't just go rinse off. So instead, you chew on parsley to freshen your breath, dust your skin with crushed iris root, and rescent your veil with a tiny pouch of cloves. Voila! Instant refresh. You step into the manor's kitchen. The cook is slicing oranges and crushing mint into a jar of vinegar, an old recipe for scented tonic, sometimes drump, sometimes used as a cleanser. A scullery maid laughs and dabs some behind her ears. So I smell like something other than onions, she jokes. And you believe her. There's even a beauty to the ritual of it. The act of layering scents, of mixing herbs, of preparing your body as if it were sacred. In many households, these preparations were part of daily life, less about impressing others and more about creating small, fragrant pockets of comfort in an otherwise rough, smelly world. But not all scents were equal. Exotic perfumes from the East, like ambergris, musk, and civet, were imported at great cost. Reserved for royalty and the ultra-wealthy, they were as much a display of power as they were of personal hygiene. Some nobles wore solid perfume beads around their necks. Others rubbed resins into their hands or hair. You once again remember those perfumed gloves. They weren't just a flex, they were armor. In contrast, a peasant might only have access to wild herbs, thyme, mint, yarrow. Effective but humble, which meant your scent told people where you belonged. A whiff of cinnamon? Money. A noseful of boiled cabbage? Poverty. This scent-based class division wasn't just noticeable, it was enforced. You hear a story being told around the hearth. A woman in London was once thrown out of a guild banquet because someone claimed she smelled like sheep. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Her scent, real or imagined, was enough to undo her place at the table. Smell became a weapon, a judgment, a tool. And for women especially, scent was linked to virtue. If you smelled bad, it was assumed you were unclean in other ways. Temptation, lust, sloth. Scent became a moral signal. A perfumed woman was seen as modest, self-controlled, spiritually intact, even though, ironically, she'd just finished rubbing animal fat into her scalp. You watch one last ritual, a young girl dipping her comb into rosemary water, brushing it through her hair before bed. Her mother lights a small clay bowl of lavender. The room softens. The smoke curls around the doorway like a lullaby. And you understand finally that beauty here isn't about transformation. It's about coping. The world is hard. Life is rough. Water is scarce and soap is a luxury. So they turn to scents, fleeting, lovely, and barely strong enough to hold off reality. But for a little while, they do.
As you drift toward the upper galleries, a hush settles over the manor again. You slip into a room filled with gowns, rows of kirtles, surcoats, and tightly laced bodices hung like silent, watching figures in the dark. The smell of beeswax, ironed linen, and something floral lingers in the air. It's time to talk about corsets before corsets were cool, because medieval bodies had expectations too. Contrary to popular belief, corsets as we think of them, steel-boned, organ-shifting torture devices, weren't a medieval invention. Those would arrive much later, during the Renaissance and Baroque periods. But that doesn't mean the Middle Ages were all loose tunics and zero pressure. No, you still had to shape yourself, just with lacing, layering, and a deep commitment to discomfort. Let's start with the silhouette. The ideal medieval woman had a long, narrow torso, a cinched waist, and gently sloping shoulders. She was soft, contained, and modest in motion. To achieve this look, she layered chemises under fitted dresses with tight bodices, often laced up the sides or front. The goal was to smooth and elongate, not exaggerate. Think elegance, not exaggeration. You walk past a mannequin dressed in a sideless surcoat, a strange, almost sci-fi looking garment with open panels down the sides to show off the tightly cinched dress underneath. It flares dramatically at the bottom, almost like a walking bell. The effect is regal, yes, but you try walking in it. Every step is a negotiation. Every breath feels like a minor betrayal. And that's just daily wear. For formal occasions, you might add a stiffened placket, essentially a primitive bust flattener, tied into place beneath your gown. Combined with long sleeves and heavy fabrics, you'd look graceful and feel like you were trapped inside a fabric burrito. Beauty wasn't about comfort. It was about control. About looking effortlessly composed even while slowly losing circulation in your ribs. You see a young lady seated near the fire, her maid tugging at the laces along her back. "Tighter," the girl murmurs. Her fingers are already purple. The maid grunts. "You won't be able to eat." "I'm not here to eat," she replies. And just like that, you understand the assignment. This wasn't just vanity. This was social positioning, quite literally. A smaller waist signaled refinement, wealth, and the luxury of not having to carry buckets or churn butter. The more delicate you appeared, the more valuable you were as a marriage prospect. Scholars still debate whether young women truly desired this shape or if it was simply expected of them. Some say the pressure was external, others that it was internalized. Likely it was both. And men? Oh, they had their version too. Tight tunics and fitted doublets came into fashion, emphasizing broad shoulders and narrow hips. Some were even padded in the chest to give a heroic barrel-chested appearance. A knight's armor was tailored to the same proportions, bulky on top, tapering to the waist. The goal was to look strong, but not bulky. Powerful, but not peasant strong. It was the medieval version of going to the gym and wearing Spanx. You pause near a chest containing rolls of cloth, stiff wool, fine linen, and velvet reserved for the elite. A note on the side reads, "boiled wool bodices," meaning these garments were soaked, shrunk, and hardened into armor-like textures. No stretch, no give, just sculpted control. But the real star of this show is the girdle, not the modern elastic kind, but long belts of fabric or leather worn around the waist, sometimes laced through eyelets to pull everything tight. Girdles were essential. They didn't just shape the body. They held up pouches, keys, rosaries, even daggers. A woman's girdle might be embroidered with prayers. A man's might bear symbols of his house. They were practical, but also deeply symbolic, signs of status, piety, and yes, waist circumference. You overhear a debate between two women near the fire. One insists that wearing a belt high on the waist makes her look taller, the other counters that it hides her hips and ruins her form. You'd think they were discussing modern fashion, and in a way they are. Because body image isn't a new obsession, it's just been passed down, stitched into every gown and whispered through every seam. Pregnancy changed things, too. Maternity dresses were rare. Instead, women wore their usual gowns looser and moved their girdles higher up the torso to accommodate a growing belly. Once the child was born, there was a rush to return to form, binding the belly, tightening the waist, concealing any softness. Even then, the ideal woman was slim and graceful. Motherhood be damned. And if you didn't fit the mold, well, you made jokes. There are medieval poems poking fun at women with wide hips or large feet. Satirical drawings of knights with beer bellies squeezed into too tight tunics. The standards were there, and people noticed when you didn't meet them. But there was also room for humor, for self-deprecation, for clever rebellion. One letter from a noblewoman describes her gown as tight enough to smother modesty, but loose enough to smuggle dessert. She gets it. You descend a spiral staircase and pass a laundry room where garments hang heavy with starch. A maid slaps a bodice flat on a wooden board and mutters, "Breathe later." You smile. She's not wrong. So what happens when you can't breathe? In rare cases, especially among nobility, women fainted. It wasn't always because of tight lacing. Fasting, stress, and anemia played their parts, but fainting became romanticized. A swoon was seen as fragile, feminine, attractive somehow, even though it usually meant someone had passed out from lack of air and was now lying on a rug like a damp sack of flour. In the end, it wasn't about comfort. It wasn't even about health. It was about perception. The illusion of effortlessness. The idea that your body, no matter how uncomfortable, should always reflect the social order. Modest, obedient, and pleasingly contained. As you lean against the wall, listening to the faint sounds of laces being pulled and sleeves being straightened, you realize something unsettling. This wasn't just fashion. It was structure. Discipline. A beautiful prison built one stitch at a time.
You find yourself in the armory now, not the blood-stained kind, but a cleaner annex filled with polished chainmail, embroidered surcoats, and a rack of grooming tools that definitely aren't for battle. This is where the men prepare, not just for tournaments, but for being seen. And tonight, we're finally turning the candlelight onto them. Because while medieval beauty standards often focused on women, make no mistake, men had their own silent rulebook, their own grooming rituals, their own fragile balance between brawn and blush. You pass a young squire trimming his beard with a small blade. He's careful, deliberate. His master prefers a short, shaped beard, the kind that signals masculinity, but still shows off the strong line of his jaw. You crouch beside a table strewn with tools, wooden combs, coarse cloths, a dish of rose water, and a small jar of red ochre. Yes, blush. For men. That's where we begin. In the medieval world, a healthy flush was considered a sign of vigor and strength for both sexes. Pale and sickly didn't work for everyone. A nobleman might dab a little rouge on his cheeks to appear more full of life. And this wasn't whispered about, it was normalized, especially at court, where appearances were weapons. A man who looked vibrant was assumed to be powerful, energetic, a good provider, a good fighter, a good everything. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or mostly restricted to certain courts, like France or Burgundy. But references to red-cheeked youth and well-colored lords pop up often enough in medieval poetry and chronicles to suggest that appearance absolutely mattered. Of course, there were limits. You glance at a mirror, one of those foggy, metal-backed ones, and imagine applying too much rouge. That could tip into ridicule. Or worse, it might be seen as effeminate. The line between groomed and unmanly was razor thin and constantly shifting. One wrong move and you'd go from dashing to disgraceful faster than you could say powder puff. Hair was equally loaded with meaning. A thick mane was prized. Balding, unless hidden beneath a hat or tonsure, was considered unfortunate. Some men rubbed onion juice or bear grease into their scalps in the hope of coaxing out a few new strands. Beard oil, meanwhile, became a symbol of status and sensuality. You find a knight smoothing cedar oil into his jawline, whispering to himself, "A good beard wins allies and dinner invitations." And what of clothing? The medieval male silhouette was carefully calculated. Broad shoulders, tapered waist,
muscular calves wrapped in hose. Those fitted tunics and leggings weren't just for show, they were anatomical highlighters. You watch a man tug on a pair of brightly dyed hose. It's a process. It takes effort and confidence, especially in front of a crowd. Even shoes played their part. Long, pointed poulaines, those ridiculous toe-curled shoes, were just as much about male status as they were about fashion. The longer the toe, the higher the rank, and walking in them, a performance of power. You weren't expected to run or even move efficiently. You were expected to pose. And then there's posture. Medieval masculinity was performative in its stillness. A strong man didn't fidget. He stood tall, arms behind his back, chest forward. Movement was measured, purposeful, because how you carried yourself said as much as what you wore. You pass a young knight practicing his stance in front of a window. He shifts his weight slightly, adjusting his chin, preparing to be looked at. But it wasn't all pageantry. There was a wild card: scars. For knights, a facial scar could be a badge of honor, proof of battle, courage, sacrifice. Some even accentuated their scars, framing them with their hairstyle or jewelry. One chronicler even describes a noble who dyed the edge of his scarred cheek to make it stand out more in candlelight, like war paint, but permanent. Still, not all marks were welcome. Pock marks, especially from smallpox, were seen as tragic blemishes. Men tried to cover them with herbal pastes or ground pearl dust. Some even wore partial face veils at court. A strong man might be admired for surviving disease, but he was pitied if it left him visibly marred. Beauty and strength were allowed to coexist, but only if the marks told the right story. You pause near the chapel door where a friar is cleaning under his nails with a sliver of wood. Even clergy paid attention to appearance, if only to avoid seeming disheveled or slothful. Cleanliness was next to godliness, after all, and a well-kept man could preach humility while still looking perfectly composed. And then there's the scent. Just like women, men used perfumes, though usually woodsy or musky. Sandalwood, amber, frankincense, something that whispered power instead of sweetness. You catch a whiff of civet on the air. Expensive, overpowering, not subtle at all. That probably means royalty. And let's not forget gestures. A nobleman's hands were never idle. They gestured with grace, rested lightly on sword hilts, or folded in prayer with careful precision. Dirty, calloused hands were for workers. Smooth, scented hands, court-ready. Still, not every man conformed. You pass a stable hand, arms scarred from work, hair shaggy and unwashed. He laughs easily. No makeup, no scent, no posing. And yet, there's a raw charm to him, something natural and unbothered. Because even in the Middle Ages, not everyone bowed to fashion. Some just were. You hear someone reciting poetry in the next room, soft verses about a man's sun-touched hair and eyes like storm glass. Romance literature shaped expectations too. Even knights weren't safe from objectification. Their looks were praised, dissected, fantasized about, especially in stories written by women who knew exactly what they wanted in a hero. Strength, yes, but also beauty, a softness beneath the armor, and definitely nice hair. You retreat from the armory, back into the hallway, as a man checks his reflection in a polished shield. He adjusts his tunic, tightens his girdle, and nods at himself. Not out of vanity, but ritual, preparation. Because here, a beautiful man isn't effortless. He's calculated, measured, deliberately composed, and maybe, just maybe, wearing a little blush under that chainmail.
You wander into the infirmary next, a quiet, shadowed space tucked behind thick wooden doors. The air smells of boiled nettles and something sharp and metallic. Light slants through a tiny window, catching the glint of copper tools, chipped ceramic bowls, and stained linen wraps. You're not here for battle wounds or fevers tonight, though. You're here to understand how marks on the body, sunburns, scars, and strange spots could speak louder than words. Because in the medieval world, your skin wasn't just skin. It was a story, a declaration of where you'd been, what you'd suffered, and who you were in society. You pass a boy sitting near a window, rubbing a greenish paste onto his arms. His skin is raw with what looks like a rash. A nun applies a poultice of ground sage and pig's lard while murmuring a prayer. She glances up at you and says simply, "He worked in the fields. The sun is cruel." And there it is, the first truth of the night. Sun exposure was not fashionable. A tan was not a mark of beach luxury. It was proof you were poor, that you worked outside with animals or crops or worse. For nobles, fair skin wasn't just beautiful, it was essential. It told everyone you had the privilege to stay inside, that you didn't plow, haul, or fetch. So, peasants burned, nobles powdered, and everyone noticed. But even more telling were scars. You move toward a low bench where a soldier is having his leg wrapped. The wound is old, a jagged scar runs across his thigh. His voice is calm, but his story unfolds in fragments. A wild boar, a misstep, a hunt gone wrong. This scar, unlike a laborer's calloused hands or a child's scraped knee, earns respect. Hunting scars, battle scars are worn like medals. If they're earned through noble activities, they elevate the wearer. But if you're scarred from disease, poverty, or punishment, that's another story. You remember pockmarks left by smallpox, deep, round craters on the face that no amount of powder could cover. Some medieval women wore thin veils or fringed hoods to disguise them. Some men used salves made of honey and myrrh, and others simply hid. Because pockmarks weren't just unattractive, they were reminders of death and contagion. People stared, or worse, they looked away. Then there's leprosy, one of the most feared disfigurements of the time. Not just for the physical toll, but for what it meant. People believed it was a divine punishment, a moral failing. Many who bore its scars were sent away, locked in leper colonies, made to carry bells to announce their approach. A visible blemish could separate you from society forever. You move to a cabinet of herbal remedies. Tucked among them is something stranger: powdered crushed pearls, white lead, and egg white paste. A noblewoman's attempt to cover a birthmark, maybe. Birthmarks, depending on who you asked, were either signs of sin, demonic influence, or, occasionally, divine favor. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were believed by the masses or exaggerated by clerics, but either way, they shaped perception. And then there's acne. Yes, even in the 1300s, teens and adults alike fought the eternal battle against blemishes. A girl sits in a corner with mashed strawberries smeared across her cheeks, an old folk cure. Another dips a cloth in vinegar and mustard seed extract. The methods are harsh, but the intent is universal. To smooth the skin, to erase the signs of imperfection, to look a little more divine and a little less real. You step into a room filled with shelves of soaps, olive oil, ash, goat's milk. Some scrubbed away grime, others were gently scented, but none could erase a scar. That required patience, reputation, and sometimes miracle water from a shrine. Because beauty wasn't always about symmetry, it was about symbolism. A perfect woman was untouched, smooth-skinned, unsullied by hardship. A man, meanwhile, could be scarred, if the scars were earned honorably. But a wench with a branded arm from a theft conviction? Or a cook with burn scars on her hands? No one wrote songs about them. Even clothing played its part in hiding or revealing. Long sleeves and high necks weren't just modest, they were protective. A noble woman with a pock-scarred chest would never dare wear a deep-cut gown, no matter how fashionable. Meanwhile, a knight with a long scar down his jaw might deliberately leave his collar open, letting the candlelight find it during dinner. One friar you meet carries a large mark across his temple. He says it came from a falling roof beam during a church fire. He tells the story like a legend. His scar to him is a divine reminder. To others, it's character, something holy, maybe even enviable. And then there's dirt. Not the symbolic kind. Real, caked on, honest-to-goodness filth. In cities, it clung to the lower classes like a second skin. A servant's stained feet, a fisherman's wind-chapped face, a tanner's arms dyed blue from the vats. These weren't scars, they were badges. Unwanted, unshakable, and visible from a mile away. Clean skin meant rank. Dirt meant labor. Still, some tried to wash it off. You see a young man scrubbing at his arms with ash and sour wine. It stings, but he doesn't stop. He's courting a girl above his station. He doesn't say it aloud, but he's trying to look cleaner, worthier. Invisible bruises made visible, scrubbed raw in hopes they'll fade. And just when you think this world can't get more quietly brutal, someone tells you about the mark of Cain, a superstition in some circles that physical deformities or unusual marks were signs of sin passed down through bloodlines. Entire families avoided because of a crooked nose or twisted finger. No evidence, no crime, just a blemish, magnified by fear. You sit for a moment, staring at your own hands. What marks would you carry here? What would they say about you? Would that sunburn mean you were poor? Would a scar make you noble? Would a rash send you into exile? Because in this world, every patch of skin is read like scripture. And beauty isn't always about being flawless. It's about being safe from scrutiny.
You've spent hours inside stone chambers and candlelit halls, but now your path leads you outdoors, into the bright courtyard of a bustling city. Your boots scuff against cobblestones. The air buzzes with the shuffle of petticoats, the creak of carts, and the occasional whinny of a horse that clearly didn't sign up for medieval urban life. And there, beyond the noise and smell, you see them. Feet, covered, hidden, and occasionally teetering on shoes that look like medieval high heels from a fever dream. It's time to talk about footwear, specifically shoes you can't walk in. You approach a pair of merchants' daughters laughing as they adjust their poulaines, long, pointed shoes with curled toes that extend several inches beyond the actual foot. Some even stretch as far as 24 inches. These aren't shoes, they're statements. If you trip over your own feet, well, that just means you're rich enough to afford fashion that doesn't work. Poulaines, also called crocevos, depending on where and when you are, became popular in the 14th and 15th centuries. They were made of leather, silk, or velvet, depending on your status. And they screamed, "I do not labor." Because you know what's really hard to do in shoes shaped like a jousting lance? Anything useful. You watch one girl trip slightly while turning. She catches herself and giggles. "Only peasants have traction," she mutters, not entirely joking. These shoes weren't just awkward, they were political. In some places, sumptuary laws actually limited how long your shoe points could be based on your social rank. The nobility could wear the longest. Merchants got modest tips. Commoners were expected to keep their toes respectably short. Historians still argue whether this was actually enforced or mostly ignored by cheeky tailors and rebellious teenagers. Either way, your shoe size didn't just say something about your feet, it said something about your place in the world. You peek into a cobbler's workshop, where strips of leather lie across the table like sleeping snakes. He's stitching a new pair of chopines, platform shoes raised several inches off the ground. Chopines were more common in Renaissance Venice, but their precursors existed here too. Wood-soled shoes designed to keep women's feet out of the mud. Practical, yes, but soon co-opted into high fashion. Some were so tall that women needed canes or attendants just to walk. You blink at a pair propped near the door. They're over a foot tall. A statement, yes. A sprained ankle waiting to happen, also yes. But what's more fascinating is how shoes became part of the illusion of beauty. You weren't just sculpting your face or waist, you were curating your movement. Deliberate steps, slow turns, controlled gestures. Because if your shoes didn't allow for a graceful exit, you had to invent one. You pass a nobleman striding carefully, his poulaines laced up the shin and stitched with gold thread. He nods without stopping. His posture is rigid, his walk a glide. And you realize it's not that he can't walk fast, it's that he chooses not to, because speed is for messengers, for butchers, for someone else entirely. And under all that splendor, sucks. Well, sort of. You peek at a lady lifting her gown slightly to step over a puddle. Her shoes are wooden clogs strapped over delicate leather slippers. Beneath those, her hose are woolen, dyed red at the toe. A small detail, but one that matters. Colored hose, especially bright ones, were signs of status. You didn't need to show your feet to impress someone. If they caught just a glimpse of red or green under your hem, they'd know you weren't just anybody. Then there's the question of size. Small feet were admired, especially for women. You hear two girls arguing in a doorway. One complains that her shoes pinch. The other replies, that means they're working. Shrinking your foot into a too small shoe was a kind of beauty game. No binding like in other cultures, but a definitive preference for dainty teps and soft padding. If your foot looked strong or wide, that meant fieldwork. And fieldwork meant sweat. And sweat, as we know, was the enemy of elegance. For men, strong calves and elegant arches were admired. There are even references in court poetry to well-formed ankles and limber strides. A knight might spend as much time adjusting his hose and boots as he would polishing his sword. If you're going to stomp into a hall and challenge someone to a duel, you might as well look good doing it. But not all shoes were fancy. You pass a beggar, sleeping on a step. His boots are stuffed with straw. One sole flaps with every shift of his weight. Nearby, a washerwoman wears wooden pattens, elevated soles tied under her shoes to keep her above the filth. They clack against the cobbles with every step. Not fashionable, not beautiful, but real. And functional, which in this world is often the opposite of beautiful. Inside the Guildhall, a merchant brags about a pair of imported slippers, dyed blue with crushed woad, stitched with silver thread. He's never worn them outside. He can't wear them outside. The streets would ruin them. But it doesn't matter. He owns them. That's the point. You watch a dancer enter the square, her shoes soft and pliable. She moves with practiced grace, her heels barely brushing the ground. For a moment, it's all weightless. No clumsy poulaines or wooden clogs, just balance. She spins, lands. smiles. Her shoes bend with her. That's beauty. Because ultimately, shoes in the Middle Ages weren't just for walking. They were for display, for rank, for ritual, a tool of seduction, restriction, and performance. Even if you couldn't walk more than 10 steps before stumbling.
You slip through a narrow wooden archway into a room thick with incense and whispers. Here, the light is softer, the walls hung with embroidered tapestries depicting saints, angels, and the occasional stern bishop glaring from behind a golden halo. This space is quiet, not out of peace, but tension, because this is where faith meets rouge, and not everyone's happy about it. Tonight's chapter is one of controversy, cosmetics, clergy, and complication. You step beside a table where a young woman dips a cloth into a bowl of crushed berries. She's staining her lips with the faintest touch of color. Her hands are careful, almost guilty. She keeps glancing at the door, like someone might burst in at any moment with a holy book and a bucket of shame. Because beauty wasn't just about appearance here, it was also morality. The line between grooming and sin, razor thin, and depending on the sermon that week, subject to change. Let's be clear. Medieval women absolutely used cosmetics. They rouged their cheeks, whitened their skin, and darkened their lashes with soot or burnt clove ash. Recipes passed down in herbal books and household manuals included ingredients like elderflower, almond oil, and beeswax. There were instructions for softening wrinkles with crushed cucumber, and even one odd potion involving mashed frogs and vinegar. Don't ask. But they weren't bragging about it, because the church saw cosmetics not as harmless enhancement, but as deception. The most devout voices insisted that altering one's appearance was to challenge God's design. It was a rejection of divine will. It said, "What you gave me isn't enough, so I'm going to fix it myself," with a bit of crushed iris root and maybe some charcoal around the eyes just for definition. Some bishops railed against makeup in their sermons, equating it to vanity, pride, and, depending on their mood, outright witchcraft. Beauty, they preached, should radiate from within. A virtuous woman glowed because of her soul, not her tinted cheeks. If you looked too good, too polished, too intentional, people would start to wonder whether the devil had a hand in your blush palette. Still, women found loopholes. You watch a noblewoman apply a rose-scented oil to her face under the guise of skin protection. Not beauty, protection. Completely different. She isn't trying to impress anyone, no. She's simply keeping her skin moist, with a touch of color, and maybe a little shimmer, but not too much shimmer, because shimmer tempts. Historians still argue how widely church teachings were enforced versus preached. We have plenty of beauty manuals, recipes, and personal letters discussing cosmetics, yet clergy texts frequently condemn them. So who won? Probably the same people who always win in society, those who quietly do what they want and pretend otherwise. Even men weren't exempt from suspicion. A lord using too much rosewater might be mocked as effeminate. A young squire who powdered his cheeks too obviously might be whispered about. You couldn't just be clean. You had to be naturally clean-looking. There's a difference. And the rules changed based on who you were. For example, a high-ranking noblewoman, married well, draped in velvet, might get away with a little rouge. People would roll their eyes, maybe whisper, but they wouldn't call her a sinner to her face. A poor girl caught powdering her cheeks with flour and ochre before a dance, that could draw actual consequences, social, spiritual, even legal. And then there was the ever-present fear of temptation. Clergy often warned that a woman wearing makeup wasn't just sinning, she was leading others into sin. A man tempted by her painted lips might lose his moral compass, fall into lust, and end up in eternal damnation, all because she wanted a little color on her face after fasting for 3 days and scrubbing herself with nettle juice. There's even a text from the 13th century in which a monk describes a painted woman as a chalice of poison, gilded without, but filled with filth. You try not to laugh, but also, wow. That said, it wasn't all fire and brimstone. Some orders were more lenient. Monasteries kept herb gardens and experimented with balms and oils, ostensibly for healing, but surely someone noticed the way rosehip salve made the skin glow. And in private, some priests kept pomanders, little scented balls made of wax and spice, not just for prayer, but to keep themselves smelling fresh. After all, piety doesn't have to mean musty. You pass a scribe's desk and spot a half-finished letter, heavy with romantic prose. The man writes of his beloved's cheeks like crushed cherries and eyes darkened by night's own ink. Poetic, yes, but also proof that, even if the church scolded, beauty was admired, praised, desired. Quietly, constantly. Women adapted. Some used only natural cosmetics, light-tinted balms, tinted waters, herbal rinses. Others swore they used no makeup at all, just good health and fasting. Others leaned into their reputations, cultivating an aura of mystique. If people were going to accuse you of vanity, you might as well make it look intentional. You step into a lady's solar and see a mirror, the rare kind, imported, convex, a little warped. She peers into it, adjusts her veil, and dabs a finger into a pot of crushed iris petals. She applies it gently to her lips, murmurs a prayer to Saint Cecilia, and breathes in deeply. Beauty, faith, danger, all balanced in a single gesture. Because medieval cosmetics weren't just decoration, they were rebellion. Subtle resistance against aging, class, expectation, and control. A way of saying, I know I'm being watched, and I'll still choose how I'm seen. You turn to leave the room, brushing past a tapestry that shows the Virgin Mary, her face serene, her skin luminous. You wonder, did the weaver add a little extra blush, just a hint of sacred glow? And if she did, was it devotion or art or vanity wrapped in silk?
You leave the chapel corridors behind and step into the great hall of a merchant's estate. The floor is tiled, the air heavy with incense and imported spice. On the long table rests a bolt of fabric that glimmers faintly in the firelight, soft as water, light as air, silk, from somewhere else. And as you walk past painted screens and wooden chests, it becomes clear, not all beauty in the medieval world was local. Tonight, you explore how beauty from the East and beyond shaped and mystified European standards, a mixture of fact, fascination, and more than a few wild misinterpretations. It all begins with trade. You glance at a crate labeled Damascus, another, Alexandria. These aren't just exotic-sounding cities, they're portals to entire worlds of scent, silk, and secrets. Perfumes that cling longer, fabrics that shimmer in candlelight, powders that make skin glow without the chalky dust of lead. Every item that arrives carries not just value, but mystique. You run your fingers over a pot of coal, imported through centuries-old trade routes. It's crushed antimony, or soot, used to darken the rims of the eyes. Practical. It shields against sun glare in desert climates. But in Europe, it becomes something else entirely. You watch a noblewoman dip her comb in orange water and hum. Her friend said she read about it in a traveler's manuscript. They use it in the East, she says softly. Then, almost defensively, it's just for the smell. She doesn't need permission, but still, she explains, because beauty imported from far away always came with extra questions. You hear someone mention Chinese powders made from crushed pearl. Another swears by Indian saffron for staining lips a deep, natural red. Most of these are exaggerated, of course, but some aren't. These ingredients traveled, slowly, secretly. 1 tin of powder could pass through 10 countries, 20 hands, 100 stories, each adding a little more glamour. And let's not forget silk. You brush your hand across a curtain shimmering with gold-threaded embroidery. Silk didn't just change fashion, it changed how people thought about beauty. It clung to the body in ways wool never could. It flowed, whispered, teased. It made the body a moving sculpture. The first time a woman walked into a European court wearing silk from Damascus or Byzantine, people didn't just see fabric, they saw magic. A scholar nearby frowns and says it's all too much, too foreign, too soft. But as he speaks, you notice the trim on his robe. Silk thread, no doubt. Imported. Beautiful. He says one thing, he wears another. Classic. So, here you are standing in a room lit by flame and colored by coaches that medieval Europe didn't always understand, but definitely borrowed from. They took the powders, the fabrics, the scents, and twisted them into something new. Sometimes reverent, sometimes ignorant, always enchanted. Because when beauty travels, it changes. And the farther it travels, the more powerful it becomes.
The sun hangs lower now, casting long shadows across the uneven stone paths as you leave the manor walls behind. You follow a narrow track that winds toward the edge of the village, where the trees grow a little closer together, and the air starts to feel heavier. Not darker, exactly, but more uncertain. You've arrived at a place where beauty is no longer admired, it's feared. Tonight we wade into dangerous waters, the ugly truth about witchy women. You pass a cluster of cottages, and a hunched woman hurries past, eyes down, scarf pulled low across her brow. No one greets her. No one watches her leave, but everyone knows where she's going. This was the fate of many women who didn't or couldn't fit the mold, because in a world where beauty equaled virtue, anything that challenged the ideal became suspicious. If your hair was gray, your skin sallow, your voice too sharp, your brows unplucked, your laugh just a bit too loud, people noticed, and sometimes they feared you. You sit near the village well and hear the gossip. A woman who brews her own herbal tonics. A widow who doesn't remarry. A midwife who knows too much about pain and blood. None of them paint their faces. None of them smile when they don't feel like it. And for some, that's all it takes. The stereotype of the ugly old crone didn't come from nowhere. It was shaped, slowly, viciously, by centuries of suspicion, religious anxiety, and gendered fear. If you weren't young, beautiful, and docile,
you were something else. And in the medieval mind, something else too often meant dangerous. Historians still argue whether the association between ugliness and witchcraft was universal or regional, but the records speak volumes. Women accused of heresy or sorcery were often described with similar language: wrinkled, gray-haired, toothless, hunched. Their physical appearance became part of the case against them, as though the body itself testified. But it wasn't just about looks, it was about behavior. Step outside the boundaries of expected femininity, and suddenly your beauty, or lack of it, became ammunition. If you were too pretty, you were a temptress. If you were too plain, you were a bitter old spinster dabbling in spells. Damned either way. You pause near a hearth where an old woman boils herbs in a pot. She murmurs something to herself. Her hair is unkempt, her hands stained with soil, but her eyes, sharp. She sees you, nods once. She's known all her life that her work, healing, midwifery, herbal brewing, is both needed and feared. She was probably beautiful once. Maybe she still is, in a quiet, earthy way. But the world doesn't reward quiet beauty. Not here, not now. You hear the story of a woman named Isolde, lived alone, owned a cat, made her own soap. When a local child fell ill, fingers pointed her way. No trial, just a crowd. They dragged her to the river and prayed her soul was clean. Whether she floated or sank didn't matter. The outcome was the same. Her crime? Not smiling enough, not grooming her brows, not being beautiful enough to be harmless. One noble woman you meet wears a heavy pendant shaped like a cross. Witch marks, she whispers, are often found under the hairline or behind the ear. She's had her maids inspect her body for strange blemishes, freckles, moles, scars. She's terrified of being misread, of growing old, of becoming less appealing, less gentle-looking, of attracting the wrong kind of gaze. Beauty in this world is a shield. You pass a church where stained glass saints all bear soft, symmetrical features. Their hair glows in golden halos. Their bodies are hidden in long, flowing robes. None are old, none are imperfect. The divine, apparently, doesn't wrinkle. And yet, the real saints, the ones who walked barefoot and slept on stone and nursed lepers, they probably looked closer to the old woman by the hearth than to the figures behind glass. But art isn't about truth, it's about aspiration. You turn a corner and find a tapestry being woven by a group of women. They murmur about a traveler who once claimed that witches in the East bathed in goat's milk and wore bone in their hair. They're always ugly, one says. Another nods. Ugly and jealous. And just like that, the story grows, merges, mutates. Somewhere along the way, beauty and goodness became so entangled that anything else, age, plainness, eccentricity, became threatening. But it goes deeper. Sometimes women use their appearance deliberately to repel, a defense mechanism, a signal. Don't approach me, don't touch me, I don't play by your rules. You meet a woman who smudges charcoal under her eyes, not to beautify, but to intimidate. She wears thorns in her braid, paints her nails with ash. When she walks into a tavern, men move aside. It's not beauty, it's armor. And sometimes The accusation of being ugly wasn't visual at all. A sharp tongue, a clever joke, a refusal to flirt. Those two became grounds for suspicion. You meet a widow who once turned down a suitor. He called her sour. A year later, when his crops failed, the village knew whom to blame. It's easier to hate a woman if you convince yourself she's ugly. Easier to punish her if her beauty isn't there to make you hesitate. But what about the reverse? You hear of women who used beauty as protection. The young ones, the sweet smiling ones. They painted their cheeks and laughed at jokes and wore their hair just so, because they knew. They knew that if they ever faltered, if they ever fell out of favor, lost their husband, grew a wart, they might end up like Isolde, or worse. So they powdered, they blushed, they shrank their voices and lowered their eyes. Beauty wasn't a luxury, it was insurance. And yet, here in this corner of the village, away from the courts and tapestries, you feel something shift. The old woman at the hearth doesn't ask for admiration. She doesn't pluck her brows or hide her grays or chase silk. She knows her beauty is something else, rooted, tough, unapologetic. And as the wind picks up and the fire crackles, you wonder, in a world that feared what it couldn't pretty up, maybe that's the most beautiful thing of all.
The wind carries you back toward the heart of the manor, a place of murals, manuscripts, and meticulous illusions. You step into the gallery, a long, echoing hall filled with stiff portraits, crumbling frescoes, and wooden panels painted in layers of lapis, gold, and guesswork. Here, beauty is eternal, or at least carefully edited. Because tonight, we're peeling back the pigments and exploring the unsettling truth. Art lies more than it tells. You stand in front of a painting of a noblewoman. Oval face, serene expression, skin like freshly falling flower. Her hair is perfectly coiled. Her hands rest gently on a silk-covered book. But something's off. Too smooth, too symmetrical. You know better. No one looks like that in real life, especially not in a century without concealer, lighting rigs, or even basic dermatology. This, you realize, is not a portrait. It's a promise. A curated version of a person, tailored for legacy and politics. In the medieval world, art was not a reflection. It was a construction. And beauty? It was one of the easiest things to fake. You walk past the tapestry where a queen is being crowned. Her features are delicate, ageless. Her waist is improbably small. The artist knew what would please the court. Records show that some noblewomen insisted on having their portraits corrected. A thinner face here, a gentler brow there, a more modest neckline. In one case, a duchess demanded her mole be painted out of her memorial fresco, lest people think she was cursed in the afterlife. Historians still debate how accurate medieval portraits really were. Some say artists aimed for flattery. Others believe symbolism mattered more than realism. That big forehead might represent intelligence. The softly smiling mouth, a nod to piety. That missing nose, probably not a fashion statement, just damage from time and mildew. In religious art especially, beauty wasn't about capturing a likeness. It was about setting a moral example. Saints were painted glowing, pure, often identical in features. The Virgin Mary, regardless of location, tended to look suspiciously like the reigning queen. Blonde, pale, symmetrical, because that's what people believed holy should look like. Heaven apparently had a type. But it gets weirder. You study a manuscript illumination. Tiny, precise, lovingly detailed. It shows a woman in a garden, plucking a rose. Her gown fits perfectly. Her hair is freshly washed, her fingers long and graceful. Except, no one wore gowns like that in gardens.
No one's hair stayed that clean near mud and bees. The artist isn't recording an afternoon stroll. He's crafting an ideal, a fantasy of nobility, courtship, and fragile, untouchable beauty. This wasn't just about ego. It was about power. If you looked noble, you were noble, at least on paper. Paintings and tapestries became tools of social enforcement. This is what a queen looks like. This is what a bride should be. This is what virtue wears. If your real life didn't match, better fix your reflection, or stop looking in mirrors altogether. You walk past the wooden sculpture of a knight. Chiseled jaw, square shoulders, immaculate armor. In reality, the man it's based on was 5'3" and had a hunch in his right leg from an old jousting injury. But no one wants to honor that. The statue isn't a tribute to his reality. It's a tribute to his image, the version of him his descendants could be proud of. And when it came to beauty standards, these idealized images fed the loop. Young women saw tapestries of slender princesses and thought, that's how I must look. Men saw saintly icons and decided that every maiden should glow like stained glass. Art created expectations, and expectations reshaped behavior. A high forehead wasn't beautiful until artists painted one on every lady in court. Then suddenly, women were plucking hairlines with fervor. Aesthetic propaganda, brushstroke by brushstroke. But art also left people out. You step into a darker corner of the gallery. A faded panel shows peasants at work. Bent backs, lined faces, tangled hair. No glamour, no glowing skin, just labor and weathered truth. These people weren't idealized. They were reminders of the real world, something to contrast against the gilded saints and powdered nobility. Even more erased were those with deformities or visible illness. A noble with a twisted hand? That hand disappeared in the painting, hidden under robes or a perfectly arranged fold of fabric. A queen with pockmarks? Gone, smoothed away like wet clay. Art forgave what reality punished. Sometimes this erasure was protective. If a noblewoman's features were softened in art, it might spare her from gossip. If a man's limp wasn't shown, his heirs wouldn't be questioned. In a world where reputation could determine marriage, wealth, or survival, the right painting was worth more than honesty. But the lies had consequences. You hear a girl whispering as she studies a tapestry. If only I looked like her. Her friend nods. She was born beautiful. But the woman they're admiring was known for wearing heavy powders, multiple veils, and spending hours preparing for court. The portrait just left all that out. It's not just a deception. It's a theft, a stolen reality. You pass a manuscript open to a page of marginalia, those little drawings in the edges. There's a nun chasing a pig, a knight fighting a snail, a monkey with a lute. Bizarre, hilarious, utterly human. You wonder if those little drawings were where artists told the truth. Not in the center, but in the corners, where beauty was allowed to be messy, where life wasn't filtered. You look one more time at the noblewoman on the wall. The paint is flaking now. Her smile has faded, but the lie still lingers, whispering its message. This is what you should be. You turn away, step outside into the cold air, and you know better.
The manor is quiet now, the courtyard empty. Only the flickering lanterns and your footsteps remain as you move through the sleeping stone halls. You follow the murmur of silk, the swish of hems brushing polished floors, until you enter the final room, a space where past and present blend, where beauty isn't just admired or feared, it's aspired to. This is where we end, in the echo chamber of longing, royal trends, and peasant dreams. You stand at the back of a grand hall, watching as noblewomen laugh softly over goblets of spiced wine, their hair coiled high, their brows delicately absent, their gowns lined in fur and imported brocade. They shimmer with powders, oils, and jewels. They glow, not with light,
but with distance. You could stand in this room for 1,000 years and never get close. These women are the standard. What they wear, others imitate. What they paint on their cheeks, others scrape from garden roots. What they whisper, the entire village shouts. You remember hearing how Queen Isabella of Bavaria popularized wide foreheads and decorative hennons so tall they made doors a hazard, or how Eleanor of Aquitaine style traveled across countries by marriage alone. Even when unseen, royal women dictated the pulse of beauty, one trend at a time. And yet, for every fashion birthed behind stained glass and velvet drapes, a ripple reached the thatched roofs and muddy paths of peasant villages. You exit the manor into the chilly night, winding through narrow lanes and smoky chimneys. In one home, a kitchen maid rubs beetroot on her cheeks before Mass. In another, a weaver's daughter adds a tiny gold stitch to her sleeve, not because it's allowed, but because it's beautiful. In a cramped loft above a stable, a young wife trims her brows with thread and breathes in the last of the lavender from a wilted sachet she traded eggs to get. They know the rules, they know the risks, but still they try. Because imitation isn't always flattery. Sometimes it's hope. You stop at a window and peek inside. A young boy wraps a belt twice around his tunic to make himself appear taller, like the squires he's seen ride past. His sister, her hair loosely braided, practices the noble woman's quiet smile in the reflection of a kettle. It warps her face slightly, but not enough to break the illusion. This is beauty at its most fragile. Not performative, not strategic, just wishful. Historians still argue whether beauty trends trickled down intentionally or accidentally. Did royals dress to inspire or simply to stand apart? What we do know is that fashion always finds its way, through gossip, through market stalls, through stories carried by traveling clerics and bards. A peasant girl might never touch damask silk, but she knows what it is. She might not wear saffron powder, but she's crushed marigold into her comb just the same. And while no one outside the castle may ever see her handiwork, she still sits by the fire at night, adjusting the lace on her chemise just in case. In the distance, you hear a festival beginning, bells ringing, tambourines shaking, laughter spilling into the streets. And here in the golden hour of moonlight and firelight, beauty looks different. A woman with flushed cheeks from dancing, a man with flowers tucked behind his ear, children draped in leftover scraps pretending to be queens and dragons. No rules here, no plucked hairlines or powdered scars, just joy. Still, the influence lingers. A merchant's wife arrives wearing a gown with a neckline just a little too low for the local priest's comfort. He clears his throat loudly. She smiles wider. A shoemaker's daughter has painted the tips of her shoes with ash to mimic the pointed poulaines she's seen in books. When someone trips over them in the dark, she only shrugs. Fashion, she says. Even a beggar has tied a length of ribbon around her wrist. It's frayed, dirty, but chosen. A ribbon is still a ribbon. And you realize, nobility may have dictated beauty, but it never fully owned it. People adapted, translated, softened the sharp edges into something livable, something theirs. Not everyone chased these trends, of course. Plenty rejected them, some out of practicality, others out of principle. But even rejection is a form of engagement. The woman who wears no powder, the man who trims no beard, they still exist in the shadow of these expectations. To not care about beauty in a world obsessed with it is oddly powerful. You watch a midwife pour hot water into a cracked basin. She's too busy for veils, too tired for perfumes, and yet her sleeves are neatly rolled, her nails clean, her braid precise. There's still beauty in it, a different kind, grounded, useful, real. As dawn begins to creep over the rooftops, the streets empty. Festival ribbons flutter in the wind. The noble women return to their halls, the peasants to their homes. And somewhere in the middle, perhaps in a corner of a smoky kitchen or at the edge of a candlelit prayer, a girl ties her hair just so and whispers a quiet truth into the morning. Maybe I am beautiful, just not the way they told me to be. And that's the beginning of something better.